Hello, everyone. It is 4 o'clock, so I will go ahead and get started. This session is about AI literacy and taking it into the everyday and our existing work that we already have prepared, including information literacy lessons and common reference interactions. I have started the recording, and we gratefully acknowledge those who have supported this mini conference. So today's session is called Threading AI Literacy into the Everyday, Incorporating AI Skills into Existing Information Literacy Lessons and Common Reference Interactions. My name is Evangeline Reid. I am the Instructional Services Librarian at Aurora University, a mid-sized private institution in the Midwest in the United States. I coordinate our instruction, and this has been a big topic that I have been thinking about. I noticed right away that many of my colleagues, including me, were not eager to immediately incorporate AI literacy into our work. We have so little time with our users, whether it is a one-shot visit to a classroom or a reference interaction at the desk. We are loath to waste that time on something that does not seem absolutely essential, and there's so much that's important. Additionally, AI feels very complicated to explain at times. My hope today is to point out in which ways it is very similar to what we are already explaining. And there was an initial sense, at least among many people I knew, that generative AI maybe wasn't going to have sticking power or maybe wasn't going to sort of incorporate itself into the everyday lives of everyone. We, however, have certainly understood that that is not the case. It is everywhere. It is for everyone. It's part of every Google search these days. So the time to help our users understand what AI is, how it works, and how to use it thoughtfully is now. Librarians and educators are already in positions where we are helping people navigate information and searching. And so we're in a good position to help with this. My goal today is to talk about what is essential to help our users understand about AI. This is something we could discuss all day, so briefly, and then talk about ways that I thread AI literacy into some existing conversations I'm already having with my users all the time, finding quality information and misinformation. And then at the end, I will wrap up by talking about where to look for examples as you continue to think about and develop opportunities for conversations around these things with your users. My hope is that throughout this, you will drop your own thoughts, ideas, and experiences in the chat because we can only enrich this conversation with other perspectives. So what's essential? This is, like I said, a really big conversation. A lot of people are talking about this topic. One of my favorite perspectives is the 6 frames for AI literacy that were developed by Sandy Herview and Amanda Wheatley and put out as a Choice 360 white paper. They talk about the idea of understanding AI and the fact that there are different types and being able to actually play around with these things, understand that you can be critical of the output of these items, and then to think about the societal aspects of AI use and consider ethical implications, and then to engage with AI discourse as it continues to evolve. These were sort of developed, in at least my understanding, with the intention that you might be able to sit down with someone and spend a while with them. And as I pointed out, that's often not the way that we are able to connect with our users because we maybe have the opportunity to connect with them one time, and we need to slide in a little bit of AI literacy. So what am I most important that I get across to them? You may come up with your own list. My essentials include the idea that AI is imperfect and biased, that it's not all knowing, it is not magic, that it can hallucinate, that's the technical term, and I always, if I use it, like to explain that to my users, that it regurgitates, and that that's a useful thing to keep in mind because it's taking in information and then spitting out what it took in, whatever that may have been, and it may not have been the highest quality, that it may support or even create misinformation, and that it can be surprisingly bad at things that we expect a computer to be good at, like counting or admitting when it's wrong. I also like to emphasize some of what they pointed out with the idea that AI is not a static object. There's a lot of different versions of AI. First of all, there's generative, there's not generative, different versions, iterations, training. One AI does not fit all tasks. However, how much of this I actually get across in an individual interaction will depend on what we're talking about. The other thing that I like to at least mention, and usually this is essentially a mention, is the ability for them to make an informed choice about use. And so this looks like a quick mention about environmental impact, about privacy, about equitable access to information, other topics like that. So let's look at this in practice. Finding quality information is a huge part of any librarian's job. When we work with our users at a reference desk, any instruction librarian who's going and talking to classes or students, huge part of our job. So we're already talking about topics like choosing where to search, identifying things that are reliable, considering what makes something authoritative or trustworthy, and selecting our sources. So we can, these next slides that I'm going to present, fit these in or this kind of topic in right after you've discussed something like the CRAP test or SIFT or whatever source evaluation approach you may take when you're trying to explain that concept to your users. Or when you're explaining effective online searching. Maybe you're just explained a Google hack. This might be a place where that slides in effectively. And if you're looking at a source together, and it is including an AI generated result, that would also be an opportunity to continue this conversation. So I usually start really basic because again, I have so little time. What's most essential? Is generative AI a good search tool? This is actually a very messy topic. You would know, of course. But I usually break it down to something that looks like this. And I give them this silly example. How long ago was 1919? Google's generative AI summary suggests that it was 20 years ago and cites a Wikipedia page. I use this as an opportunity to talk about the fact that AI does make mistakes and often in things that we might think it would be really good at. And then this allows me to also point out that examples like this look really obvious to us, but usually I'm searching for information because I don't know the answer. And so the issues that I find with searches are often a lot more complicated. This is also where I might point out that AI has sort of slipped its way into our everyday search tools instead of us having to go to a search tool, which is a little bit about the idea that search tools, that AI is not all the same. I also always like to use this example. How many rocks shall I eat? Google's AI summary suggests that we should eat at least one small rock per day. This will usually get a little bit of a laugh and is a great opportunity to point out that they are getting their information from a site, The Onion, that is intended to look, sound, and in all ways be like a news organization's website, except for how it is satirical and how that's something that humans are pretty good at identifying. And if they were using the CRAP test or the SIFT test or any of those tools that we might help them learn how to use, they would probably have identified that that's what was going on. If they were using lateral reading, they would identify that that's what's going on. Whereas AI doesn't quite have that down yet. And then this is also a great opportunity to point out the importance of looking at why AI says something to be true. And again, if you've just been talking about source evaluation, you've probably talked about accuracy, you've probably talked about evidence. Great opportunity to point out that this is the exact same mechanic they've just been practicing there. They can go there and they can use their own critical thinking skills. With certain classes, I will then use the opportunity to very quickly show them how ineffective going to an individual search engine might be still. Using something, for example, like a general search, or I shouldn't say search, general generative AI interface like ChatGPT 4.0 mini. And I'm careful to point out that it's that iteration. If I ask them to do what is essentially their assignment, it will make up things that don't exist, things that maybe are somewhat close to what exists, things that do exist but are not peer reviewed, things that are outside their criteria. The list goes on and on. And that's usually a useful point to kind of emphasize that these tools aren't necessarily the best at doing what we might want them to do. A more advanced opportunity would be to present the results from a general tool versus a more search-focused one. There are, of course, many different levels of search-focused ones. Perplexity would be on sort of the simpler side versus Research Rabbit or Semantic Scholar or Consensus on the more advanced side. And if you're in a reference interaction with someone and they've shown you search results that they've gotten through something like ChatGPT, this can be a really productive thing to go try as well. In general, this approach I find emphasizes their unique human critical thinking skills as well as their unique ability to do the things that you've been teaching them and use the same skills they've already been using and learning and applying in other contexts, and also gives you the opportunity to emphasize some general essentials that AI makes mistakes and that not all AI is the same. You need different tools for different things, that kind of stuff. Another way that this may fit in is if you're having a conversation that's more focused on authority, in particular around the idea of who we trust for information. I often do what I call a gossip activity, where I ask students to consider who they would trust information from and why, what criteria they might consider. That brings up the great question of who is generative AI, which then allows you to sort of ponder for a quick moment, at least, the idea that, there isn't really a great way to research who is generative AI. It's not like you can open a new tab and go see, oh, this is how people know this person to be, or this is what they've done in the past, because it's a little bit more elusive. It's a little bit more of a black box. In reference interactions, I often find that this essentially looks like what I would describe as sort of the point and comment option. So did you realize that this is AI generated? Those summaries, I find many of my users just don't even realize is AI generated. Sometimes they are well labeled, and different interfaces, they are not as well labeled. And I also really like to take the opportunity to, if there's, in this case, I had to click show more, but there is a sort of warning note that generative AI is experimental. And so I really like to take the opportunity to look at that and show the user that that's something that even the organization creating this information is saying, and then prompt further suggestions for clarity. And that then gives me the opportunity to basically do the in-action version of what I might do in a presentation to say, let's open the source, make our own assessment. In this case, a congress.gov source. This might be a pretty solid source, so we're in good stead. I also like to use this opportunity to make more in-depth comments about how these things work or the impact on the environment, for example. So saying, oh, this is a really cool AI generated image. Let's make sure we save it. It uses a surprising amount of energy. I would love to make sure you can use it again next time. All right, misinformation, another very big category. Let's discuss how we might approach it from this perspective. You are already talking about fact checking, lateral reading. I know there's some overlap with the last category, but this one is going to focus on the misinformation perspective more specifically. Source credibility and the idea of journalism or high quality journalism, those types of conversations. So this might fit in a conversation about misinformation, disinformation. This might fit when you are talking about what it means to fact check or what it means for a journalist to investigate a claim and how that might be different than just an everyday run-of-the-mill thought about something. And is just a great example of taking a closer look at our sources in general. I really like to use AI content as my manipulated content examples. So we have things like video manipulation, we have completely AI generated images, and a lot of these have been in the news recently. So these are actually often a great way to catch your audience's attention, and also a wonderful opportunity to demonstrate how to do reverse image searching. Again, something you might have already been talking about, to consider where exactly did this come from, who originated this content, and in the context of the CNN generated item or manipulated to appear to be from CNN, to consider if we go to the CNN website, do we in fact see that there? In this context, I also like to take the closer look and think about fact checking from the idea of just closely inspecting something. And this is a great opportunity to use AI generated images as an opportunity to talk about that and talk about some of the things that you might look for, and to talk about bad actors who may be mass producing information because there are economic benefits. For example, to mass producing internet website or mass producing text for an internet website because they can get a lot of ad revenue by doing so with very little human oversight and thus lower quality. And so that's a great opportunity again to point out when you are opening a new tab and exploring a source. One other thing you might look for is a website that includes something that is putting out too much content too quickly to possibly be human generated and have oversight. This is also a wonderful opportunity to think about the idea of bias and stereotypes. Some of you may be familiar with the Dove, as in the soap company, prompt playbook. I really appreciate the work they've done there. If you haven't, I would really encourage you to take a look at that. I like to use those examples as ways that we can avoid the bias and stereotypes if we are doing image generation. In general, this approach continues to emphasize the unique human critical thinking skills that our users have and emphasizes those tried and true techniques that we are already using across our misinformation and disinformation skill set, going back to what's the origin of this? Where did this come from? All of that sort of approach. And it allows us to consider the larger ethical implications of AI, misinformation, all of that most wonderful and important essential content. In a reference interaction, I find this often ends up looking like a question because I don't want to come across as accusatory or make someone feel bad about having potentially believed something that's incorrect. So I often will say something like, wow, that's so surprising. I wonder where that came from. Or did you know that AI generated images often have, and you'll do a little point, this feature, this type of glowy skin. Or I noticed there's no author. I wonder if humans looked at this before it was posted. Let's take a closer look at the website. And these types of things are just a great opportunity for us to essentially do what we're already doing, taking a closer look and critically thinking about our information. My pointing approach. As you continue to think about these things and where to look for examples, one of my favorite places to go is the News Literacy Project. In particular, I like their Rumor Guard website, which includes an AI filter, so you can find examples of incorrect information that can be found online that was created by or facilitated by artificial intelligence. I'm also a huge fan of their SIFT newsletter. This is catered towards educators. I find this to be extremely useful for me as a instruction librarian as well. And they have past archived editions on their website, and I love getting this in my inbox almost every week. And in general, when we're talking about information, we're often thinking about it through the lens of mistakes and flaws. As unfortunate as that is, that's often how we can really learn. And so I like going to fact-checking organizations for opportunities to learn. They have identified those types of issues, of course. And unfortunately, also these things do happen in the news. We've all seen them. So-and-so used this item, used AI to do this, and unfortunately it went awry. Can be a learning opportunity for our users. So I've gotten through a quick overview of some of the essentials of this very big topic, hopefully things that feel very practical and applicable to you. I see that the chat has been going wild, so I would like to pause here, take some questions, and hopefully read the chat and see what great things have been coming up. Thank you very much for listening.
Do you want us to just jump in with audio or?
You're welcome to, sorry, great question. You're welcome to speak out loud, or if you submit anything, if you submitted a question to the chat, I will eventually find it. I'm going through right now.
Okay. I can just say it audibly if you want.
Sure.
That would be helpful. I'm in the realm of media literacy, so more general literacy than just within a library setting, but we are, we're colleagues in this effort to try to build critical thinking skills. And there are many people we are discovering that there are many people who are critical about critical thinking because it has sometimes been co-opted in one-sided political conversations. And
Mm.
when I have brought up fact checkers, some people are leery of even the fact checkers. And one of the pioneers in media literacy has pointed out that fact checking resources can have and do have their own biases. And that if you're trying to say, well, this resource is where it falls on the political spectrum, that those tools are in themselves biased. So, but
Mm.
I think it's important to recognize that, but I'm more interested in how, if you have run into this, and how you respond to people who are like, well, they basically don't trust anything institutionally, but they don't practice critical thinking on their own engagement, on their own biased engagement, their own confirmation bias. So I'm just interested if you've had any thoughts on that.
That topic is huge, and I do have a lot of thoughts on it. What I'll say for right now is that I am very interested in the idea that media bias charts, which I think is what you're getting at, are in and of themselves biased and misleading. And actually, that's something I like to talk with my students about because I think that a lot of them are so comfortable with looking to something for an answer instead of making their own determination. And I don't think that that's productive for their life in general. Um, um, in terms of, or sorry, you were going to add
I
something?
was just going to applaud that. I love that insight. That's the approach that we take we start by saying, you've got to figure out who you are and where you stand, and then exercise your own skills. Don't rely on other people. Excellent. Excellent.
Totally. Totally. I'm 100% on board with that. And that's something that I find is incredibly important. And I think it's important within AI as well. I really like to, whenever I'm talking about AI, to just make a note that you should have your own experiences with and make your own informed opinions about AI based on your values and what's important to you. Um, at the end of the day, my goal is just to help my users understand what's happening and make sure they're using it safely and wisely and thoughtfully. Um, but at the end of the day, they may have slightly different values or needs than I need. So yeah, I don't know. I think I could talk a lot about your topic.
Oh, excellent. That I just, in that sort of collective learning, I just want to hear how other people are navigating this, and that just squares with my experience as well. So thank
Yeah. Um, okay, so I'm looking at the chat, and actually, fact checking is a really interesting thing. It's obviously a really hot topic right now, and it's something that I actually have a whole other thing that I've been working on related to that, actually. But one of the things I focus on is taking a closer look at how they function. And usually, when you start really looking at how they function, there's a little bit more comfort there and a little bit less fear or a little bit less sense that they are, in fact, incredibly biased or whatnot. Of course, there's inherent bias in almost anything. It's really hard for anything to be entirely unbiased, which is something again that's useful to talk about with their users. But actually, the News Literacy Project, their Checkology section has entire lessons where you can sort of go through and pretend you are a fact checker that are actually really fun. And they also have some that are things you can sort of enact as lessons with your students. But I don't know, again, we have so little time that it can be hard to do that sometimes. Um, I don't know that I have those things right at my fingertips to share,
you. No worries. Yeah.
but yeah, I essentially we're just looking at, okay, is this essentially actually true, or was this person really here? Maybe they weren't. Okay, then we can't say that this thing was truly backed up by evidence. Um, oh, I love this link to the to Pointner's International Fact Checking Network. Wonderful. Um, I see a question about the difference between open source AI versus premium AI sources. This is something that's a big concern for me because of the equity angle. I think that we're continuing to move towards an area and a time when there's going to be a lot of disparity there in the same way that we see a lot of sort of locked gardens around information in general. Um, so in general, I find that those premium AI tools do work better. But in general, I sort of am unwilling to take them into consideration because they're not accessible to all of my users. So I sort of don't consider them, which is maybe that's just been my approach. See what else is in the chat here. Yes, the idea of false research articles becoming fabricated, essentially it is just sort of predicting what the next word is going to be based on the context. So often there is some relevance to existing research. So it'll be a real author or the name seems very similar to a real author and maybe it's in the field that they actually do work in. It's just not something that actually exists. It's not the right journal, the night, the year, the volume, the issue, it just doesn't all match up. And so that actual specific thing was never really real. And that's part of what I try to emphasize to students when they start to become, a little bit suspicious of why I'm explaining it is that when we're looking for something solid and real, generative AI, again, generative AI is sort of doing this very elaborate guessing game that isn't so great at what we're actually trying to do. If we are searching in a specific tool that focuses on a preset set of information that is, for example, like Semantic Scholar I mentioned earlier, it searches across known information, existing research articles. That's the data it's trained on. And so then it doesn't really hallucinate because it is only working with existing information. Also, Brooke Becker, I totally agree with you on the media bias charts. Good explanation. And K Martin in the chat is describing that it is arguably impractical for people to fact check everything, and it's 100% true. Often when I'm talking to my users, I will acknowledge this and point out that there's essentially a need to make a decision tree about how important this is for you, and that ideally, if you're in an academic field, that should maybe be a little bit higher, and things like maybe medical decisions should probably be a little bit higher versus what you eat for dinner, what you're going to watch for TV, maybe are not as serious. And that they have to make a decision about that, but it should be a thoughtful one. I see an earlier question about something that I actually trust AI to save me time with. Um, I am quite suspicious of AI. So me personally, trust it with quite little. I mostly trust it with helping me write like alt text for images and things like that. But it can be quite good at a couple things. I've even seen it be relatively useful for something like keyword brainstorming with a little bit of suggestions or prompting. Um, it can do some interesting things. I have a list at another place. Thank you to everyone who attended. Uh, oh, people are becoming friends in the chat. How exciting. And I'll just include a couple links in the chat for anyone who wants to investigate a few of the things I mentioned. I think that might be the last session of the day. I'm not sure.
Yes, I believe so.
There's a closing keynote, so go ahead and head on over there, folks. Thanks, everyone.